What would you do if you woke up in a hospital bed and found out your parents had left you to die? My name is Cassandra Mitchell. I'm 28 years old, and just 3 months ago, I thought I had everything. A loving family, a successful career in biotech, a future full of hope. But that night changed my life forever. I had just finished giving a presentation at a major cancer research conference in New York City. My work focused on targeted therapies, medicines designed to attack cancer cells with precision, leaving healthy cells unharmed. It was the kind of work that could save lives, and I was proud of it. The audience applauded. My research was finally being recognized. It was raining hard that night. I remember checking my GPS on the drive back to Boston. I had about an hour left on the road. The highway was dark and the rain came down like a waterfall. I could barely see the lanes. I slowed down, trying to stay safe. That's the last thing I remember. When I woke up, everything hurt. I couldn't move. My arms, my legs, even my chest all felt like they were on fire. There was a machine beeping near my head. The lights were too bright. The air smelled like bleach and alcohol. I was in a hospital bed, but I didn't know why or how I got there. A nurse noticed I was awake and rushed over. "You're okay now," she said softly. "You've been in an accident. You were unconscious for 4 days. You're lucky to be alive." Lucky. I couldn't speak. My throat was too dry, my mouth too weak. But in my head, I was screaming. Where were my parents? Later that day, the doctors came in. They explained my injuries: broken ribs, a fractured hip, internal bleeding, a concussion. I had undergone emergency surgery the night of the crash. If the ambulance had arrived just 10 minutes later, they said I might not have survived. I blinked slowly, trying to stay focused. "Have my parents been here?" I asked in a whisper. They looked at each other awkwardly. One doctor finally said, "We contacted the people listed as your emergency contacts, Robert and Eleanor Mitchell. They visited briefly the first night, but they haven't returned." They hadn't returned. My parents, the people who raised me, who pushed me so hard to succeed, had left me here, broken in a hospital bed, alone. It didn't make sense. The next few days were a blur of tests, therapy, and tears. I kept hoping they would come back, that I would see my mother's face at the door, her eyes full of worry, or hear my father's voice, serious but calm, telling me I'd be fine. But the door never opened for them again. Instead, someone else came. An older woman named Joan Harper. She said she was my grandmother's lawyer. She handed me an envelope. "This was left in our care, to be given to you only if something happened, something life-threatening," she said gently. "I'm so sorry it came to this." Inside the envelope was a letter from my grandmother. I had never met her. My parents had always said she passed away before I was born. But here was her handwriting, her words, her truth. "Dear Cassandra," it began. "If you are reading this, then something terrible has happened, and I was no longer there to protect you. You deserve to know everything, the truth about who you are and who you're not." My hands trembled as I read the letter. "I am your real grandmother. Your mother, my daughter, gave birth to you when she was just 16. She died shortly after you were born. You were placed in the care of a private adoption agency. That's where Robert and Eleanor Mitchell adopted you. But they didn't do it out of love. They did it because they knew you would inherit my fortune one day. I left it in a trust for you alone, and they wanted control of it." I stared at the paper, unable to breathe. My entire life had been a lie. I remembered the strange things from my childhood. The missing baby photos, the newer birth certificate, the way my parents never wanted me to take a DNA test, the sudden emotion in my mother's eyes when I asked about our past, the word investment they always used when talking about my future. I thought they meant they had poured their energy and love into raising me, but now I saw it clearly. They had invested in me like I was a stock, and they had waited for the payout. The inheritance had come when I turned 25, $4.5 million from my maternal grandmother. I used some of it to fund my research and bought a small condo. My parents were upset that I hadn't let my father manage the money. They acted like I had betrayed them. But now I realized they were angry because they were losing control, because I had finally done something for myself. They had never truly loved me. They had used me, and when they realized I might not survive the crash, that I might die before they could access more of my funds, they walked away. The doctors told me my recovery would take months, but the pain in my body was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. Still, I had questions. Who were my real parents? Why did my grandmother hide the truth for so long? And most of all, what would Robert and Eleanor do once they realized I had survived? I knew one thing: I wouldn't stay silent. They thought they had buried the truth, but I was still here, and now, I was going to uncover everything. I spent the next 2 weeks in the hospital. Most of that time I was in pain, both physically and emotionally. I had bruises across my ribs, a fractured hip, and stitches on my arm. But none of that hurt as much as knowing the truth. Robert and Eleanor Mitchell weren't my real parents. They had raised me, yes, but not out of love, out of greed. They had adopted me because I came with something: money, a trust fund, an inheritance from a grandmother I never knew. A grandmother they told me was dead before I was born. But now I knew she was alive long enough to write me a letter that shattered my world.
The lawyer who brought me the letter, Joan Harper, came to visit again. She sat quietly by my bed, her hands folded neatly on her lap. Your grandmother loved you very much, she said. She kept track of you from a distance. She wasn't allowed to interfere with the adoption, but she set up the trust to make sure you'd always have something for yourself. I blinked back tears. Why didn't she ever try to meet me? She did, Joan replied softly. She reached out once when you were around 9. Your adoptive parents told her to stay away. They threatened legal action. I closed my eyes. It was all starting to make sense. The control, the pressure, the way they reacted when I didn't follow their path exactly. It had never been about me. It was always about the money. Joan handed me a small folder. Your grandmother also left behind documents, birth records, the adoption file, and her personal notes. I opened it slowly. Inside were papers with official stamps, a copy of a handwritten birth certificate, and photos of a woman who looked just like me. Auburn hair, green eyes, my biological mother. Her name was Lila. The first thing I wanted to do when I left the hospital was visit her grave. According to the documents, Lila had died just 3 days after I was born. Complications after childbirth. She had been just 16 years old. She was buried in a quiet cemetery on the edge of town. I brought flowers, not because I knew her, but because I wanted to. I stood at her grave for a long time. The name Lila Ann Carter was etched into the stone. I'm sorry it took me this long to find you, I whispered. In that moment, I promised her I would find out everything. Who she was, what really happened, and why the people who took me from her never told me the truth. I was released from the hospital in a wheelchair, with weeks of physical therapy ahead of me. But my body wasn't my main concern. I needed answers. The first person I called was my godmother, Diane. She was my mother's college roommate and had always been close to our family. Or so I thought. She picked up after the second ring. Cassandra, oh my God, I heard about the accident. Are you okay? I survived, I said. My voice was cold, but it turns out I've been living a lie. Did you know I was adopted? Silence. Diane? I asked again. More silence. Then finally, yes, I knew. My stomach turned. Why didn't you ever tell me? I wanted to, she said. So many times. But your parents, Robert and Eleanor, they made it clear that you were never to find out. They said it would ruin everything. I felt sick. Ruin what? They didn't want you asking questions, especially not about the trust. They were always so focused on your inheritance. They were angry when it was set up in a way they couldn't fully control. Over the next week, I began digging through everything my grandmother had left me. There were letters, dozens of them written to me, but never sent. Some were even returned to her unopened. She had tried to be part of my life. She had sent birthday cards, pictures, even small gifts, but they never made it into my hands. My adoptive parents had blocked them all. The more I read, the more I saw a picture of a woman who had been desperate to protect me, even from a distance. And the more I read, the angrier I became. One night, while going through my grandmother's notes, I found something strange. A receipt. It was from a private clinic in Boston, dated a few months after I was born. My grandmother had paid for genetic record confirmation. The name on the file, Cassandra Carter, not Mitchell. There was also a letter folded tightly behind the receipt. It was from a woman named Sarah Green, a nurse at the adoption agency where I had been placed. She wrote that she had concerns about the Mitchells from the very beginning, that something felt off, that they were more interested in the financial aspects of the adoption than in the child. Me. She had even written that she warned the agency director, but no one listened. This wasn't just a lie. It was a setup. A week later, I received a phone call from my old apartment complex. The manager said someone had been trying to access my unit, claiming to be a relative. When he refused, they left in a hurry. I knew who it was. Robert and Eleanor had finally realized I was alive. And now they wanted answers too. Or worse, access. But I wasn't that helpless little girl anymore. And I wasn't going to let them control me again. I called Joan the next morning. I want to pursue legal action, I told her. I want to stop them from ever touching my money. And I want a full investigation into my adoption. Her response was firm. We'll get started immediately. As I hung up the phone, I realized something. They had built their entire lives around my silence. But I wasn't silent anymore. The day I saw Robert and Eleanor again, it felt like stepping into a courtroom. Even though we were just in my condo's lobby, I had told the building security in advance, don't let them in, but I needed to see them. Not for closure, for truth. They showed up looking polished, like nothing had happened. My father in his navy suit, my mother in pearls and a pale pink coat. They looked like they belonged on a holiday card, not like people who abandoned their daughter in a hospital bed. You're alive, Robert said, as if it was a surprise. I am, I replied. Disappointed? His jaw tightened. Eleanor gave a nervous laugh. Sweetheart, don't be dramatic. We were told you wouldn't make it, so you just gave up. We didn't want to interfere with the doctors, Robert said quickly. You were in critical condition. We thought it was best to stay out of the way. I stared at them. You stayed out of the way for 2 weeks. They didn't answer. I took a deep breath. I know everything. Eleanor blinked. What do you mean? I know I was adopted. I know you kept my grandmother away. I know why you really raised me. They didn't deny it. My father sighed. You've always been smart, Cassandra, but you don't understand how the world works. That inheritance was meant to be used wisely. We were the ones who gave you the life that led to it. My blood boiled. You gave me rules, pressure, guilt. You never gave me love. My mother looked down. We did what we thought was best. No, I said. You did what was best for you. And when I didn't follow your plan, when I refused to let you manage my money, you turned your backs on me." Robert's tone turned cold. "That money is ours by right. We raised you. We deserve something for that." I stepped back. "You'll get nothing." That night, I told Joan everything about the meeting. She wasn't surprised. "We'll move forward with freezing access," she said. "And the investigation into your adoption is already underway. You'll need to be ready though. If they fight back, it could get ugly." "I'm ready," I said. But I wasn't. Not for what came next. The next week I received a letter from a lawyer representing the Mitchells. It was short and direct. They were contesting the trust, claiming they had been promised access, that I was mentally unstable due to the accident, that I was acting under emotional stress. They wanted the court to take control of my finances. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. They were trying to take everything. Again. Joan and I responded fast. We submitted hospital records proving my mental clarity. We included the letter from my grandmother, the nurse's testimony from the adoption agency, and the financial trail that showed how they had tried for years to get my money through business proposals. Still, I couldn't shake the fear. What if the court believed them? What if they won? That's when Diane, my godmother, reached out again. "I want to help," she said. I stayed silent for too long. She wrote a sworn statement. In it, she described how the Mitchells used my inheritance as leverage, how they had once joked at a dinner party that their retirement plan had red hair and a PhD. Me. That statement changed everything. Meanwhile, I kept digging into the adoption file. There were still pieces missing, details blacked out, names withheld. But then, buried deep in the folder, I found a name I didn't recognize. Dr. Alan Weiss. He had been listed as the attending physician at the private clinic where I was born. I searched for him online. He was retired now but still lived in Massachusetts. I decided to call him. At first he didn't want to talk, but when I said the name Lila Carter, he went silent. "You're her daughter," he said finally. "Yes. I remember her. Bright, scared, but strong. She loved you." I swallowed hard. "Do you know what happened? Why I was given up?" There was a pause. "She didn't want to give you up. But her father, your grandfather, forced her to sign the papers. He said he'd handle everything." I froze. "My grandfather?" "Yes. He arranged the adoption through connections. It was not exactly legal, but people looked the other way back then." "Do you remember who the couple was?" I asked. He took a long breath. "Robert and Eleanor Mitchell. They were wealthy, charming. He told me they were friends of the family. It was deeper than I thought. Not only had Robert and Eleanor adopted me for money, they had connections to my mother's family. Possibly even used those ties to take me in before the system could find someone else. I was never just a child to them. I was a transaction." At the next court hearing, we presented everything. The documents, the doctor's statement, the godmother's letter, even my own testimony. The Mitchells sat across from me, stone-faced. Their lawyer argued I was ungrateful, but the judge didn't buy it. In a calm, firm voice, the judge ruled, "The trust will remain under Cassandra's control. The Mitchells have no legal claim to it or to her medical or financial decisions. The court sees no grounds for further involvement from them." It was over, legally at least. After the hearing, Eleanor approached me in the hallway. Her voice was quiet, almost broken. "We still raised you." I looked her in the eye. "No. You raised a version of me you could control, but now I'm free." She didn't reply. They both walked away. This time I didn't watch them go. Back home, I sat on my couch, surrounded by letters from my real grandmother, pictures of my birth mother, and the truth I had fought so hard to uncover. I wasn't just a researcher. I was a survivor. I was a daughter of someone brave and kind, and for the first time in my life, I belonged to myself. After the court case ended, things got quiet. Too quiet. For the first time in months, I wasn't fighting legal battles or recovering from surgeries. I was home, in my condo in Cambridge, staring at boxes full of letters and documents from a past I never knew I had. But I couldn't let it go. Something still didn't feel right. I knew who raised me and why. I had seen the court cut them off for good, but a question kept spinning in my head. Why did my real mother, Lila, have no say in any of this? I had learned that her father, my biological grandfather, had arranged the adoption behind her back, that he'd handed me off like an unwanted object. But why? Why give me to a couple like the Mitchells? And who was he? I called Joan, my lawyer, and asked for help tracking him down. His name was Harold Carter. According to public records, he had passed away 10 years ago. No obituary, no funeral records, just a death certificate filed quietly in a small town outside Providence, Rhode Island. But something strange came up. Joan found property records showing that Harold Carter had once owned a biotech firm, a private one, focused on medical testing. And guess who had invested in it? Robert Mitchell, the same man who later adopted me. My stomach dropped. Robert hadn't just stumbled into adopting me. He had been working with my grandfather. This wasn't just an adoption. It was a deal. I dug deeper. Late into the night, I went through every file my grandmother had left behind. And then I found it. A journal entry, dated 2 weeks before my birth. Harold keeps talking about the Mitchells. He says they can give Cassandra a future. But I don't trust him. He wants money. He keeps saying this is business. I want to raise her myself. I told him. I begged him. But he doesn't care. It hit me like a slap. My mother hadn't abandoned me. She had fought for me. And she had been silenced. The next morning, I drove to the small town where my mother had lived before her death. The house she grew up in was still there, small, white, and slightly run down.
A neighbor was outside watering plants. Her name was Margaret, and she had lived next door for decades. When I explained who I was, she nearly dropped her watering can. "You're Layla's girl," she whispered. "I thought I'd never meet you." She invited me in and poured sweet tea into glass cups. "Layla was the brightest thing this street ever saw," Margaret said. "She wanted to be a nurse. She used to practice on her dolls. But her father, he was something else. Cold, controlling. When she got pregnant, he lost it." "Did she want to keep me?" I asked. Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. "Oh honey, she used to sit on that porch every night, rubbing her belly and talking to you. She even made a little quilt for your crib." She paused, then added, "But one day she was just gone. Her father said she had complications. No funeral, no service, just gone."
That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Margaret said, no funeral, no service, just gone. And something clicked. Joan had told me that my mother died from birth complications, but what if that wasn't the whole truth? What if she didn't just die? What if she was taken? I went back to the adoption file. There was a medical certificate of death, but it looked strange. It didn't have a hospital name or a doctor's signature. It was signed only by Harold Carter, and it was filed the same day I was placed in the Mitchell's care. That wasn't normal. I showed the document to Joan. She raised an eyebrow. "This looks forged," she said. "Want me to pull hospital records?" "Yes," I said, "everything you can find." A week later, she called with news. "There's no hospital record of Lila Carter dying in childbirth," she said. "In fact, there's no hospital record of her giving birth anywhere in Massachusetts. But she existed. I'm here," I said. "I know, that's the thing," Joan replied. "There is a record of an unnamed baby girl being born at a private clinic. Same date, same blood type, same birth weight. But the mother was listed as unknown. No ID, no history, nothing. What does that mean? It means someone erased your mother from the system." My head spun. My grandfather hadn't just given me away. He had erased Lila, hidden her, maybe even killed her. It was hard to say. There was no body, no grave, no photos after the day I was born. My grandmother must have suspected. That's why she tried to stay in touch. That's why she fought so hard to leave me something. Maybe she never believed the story either. That night, I opened the last sealed envelope my grandmother had left me. It was labeled simply, "For when you're ready." Inside was a photo of Lila, holding a tiny baby wrapped in a pink blanket. Me, and on the back, in soft handwriting, "She never stopped loving you. Even when they tried to take everything, she held on." I cried, for the mother I never knew, for the girl I used to be, and for the woman I was becoming, someone finally strong enough to face the truth. After everything I had learned, the fake death certificate, the erased hospital records, the deal between Robert Mitchell and my grandfather, I couldn't stay silent. Too many people had lied. Too many people had looked the other way. And my real mother, Lila Carter, deserved better. She deserved justice. And I deserved peace. I sat in my home office one evening, staring at the letter from my grandmother again. Her words echoed in my mind. They tried to take everything, but she held on. I looked up at the camera I had bought earlier that week. Then I pressed record. "Hi, my name is Cassandra Mitchell, and I was raised by liars." That's how I began the video. For 20 minutes, I told my story. Not the polished version, not the research awards or science grants. The real story. I talked about the crash, the abandonment, the inheritance, the adoption cover-up, the lies told to me for 28 years. I showed the letters, the forged documents, the picture of my real mother, Lila, holding me as a baby. I didn't ask for pity. I just wanted truth. Some of you watching this may have your own questions about family. I said near the end, if something feels wrong, trust that feeling. I did, and it changed everything. I ended the video with one sentence. Lila Carter, wherever you are, I remember you now, and I won't let them erase you again. Then I posted it online. I expected maybe a few hundred views. What I got was an explosion. Within 48 hours, the video hit over 2 million views. Thousands of comments poured in. "You're so brave for speaking out. I was adopted too, and your story gave me strength. Justice for Lila." People shared it on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, everywhere. Journalists reached out. Podcasts wanted interviews. Even a documentary crew contacted me. But what surprised me most was a message I got from a woman in Vermont. Her name was Cynthia. She was a nurse, retired now, and used to work at the private clinic where I was born. Her message said, "I remember your mother. She didn't die during childbirth. She was taken away screaming, and we were told never to speak of it again." I called her immediately. Cynthia confirmed everything. She was sedated after delivery. When she woke up, her baby was gone. She kept asking for you. Her father showed up the next day with a lawyer and a signed paper. She disappeared that afternoon. I asked, "Do you think she was killed?" Cynthia paused. "I don't know, but I know she didn't leave by choice." That was all I needed to hear. With Joan's help, I submitted a formal request to reopen my mother's case as a possible criminal investigation. The police are now reviewing the forged documents and the connection between Harold Carter and Robert Mitchell. If charges are filed, I'll be ready to testify. I'm not scared anymore.
Meanwhile, something unexpected happened. A university in New York offered me a guest position, not just for my research, but to lead a new program in bioethics and medical transparency. They said my story had inspired change, that students wanted to learn from someone who had seen both science and secrecy. I accepted. As for Robert and Eleanor Mitchell, they've disappeared from public view. Their firm quietly closed down. Their names are no longer on the donor wall of the local hospital, and their neighbors are asking questions they can't answer. But I don't care what happens to them anymore, because I'm done living in their shadow. 1 month after posting my story, I received a small package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a charm bracelet, delicate, silver, with a single engraved letter, C, and a note that read, "For the daughter who was never forgotten." My hands trembled. There's still no proof that my mother is alive. No confirmed sightings, but in my heart I believe she's out there, watching, waiting, maybe even healing. And if she is, I hope she knows. Her daughter didn't just survive. She rose. She told the truth. She broke the silence. This was never just about an inheritance. It was about identity, memory, and power. I may have been raised by people who lied to me, but now, I live for the truth.